According to historical records, the largest Xiongnu invasion was the siege of Baideng, encountered by Emperor Gaozu of Han Liu Bang. In the autumn of 201 BC, Modu Chanyu, who had just unified the steppe, led 400,000 Xiongnu cavalry to break through the Han defenses set up in Mai and Jinyang. When the news reached Chang'an, Liu Bang decided to personally lead the campaign. He took Chen Ping, Fan Kuai, Zhao Ying, and other old comrades northward, advancing all the way, directly driving the Xiongnu allied forces back to the border. Consecutive victories made Liu Bang overconfident. In his heart, he mocked, "So you are the Xiongnu." He even sent more than 10 groups of envoys to persuade the Xiongnu to stop the war, wanting them to realize that the central elite army and the irregular forces were simply not of the same level. He led the vanguard, with 200,000 soldiers behind him, so how could there be an opponent he could not defeat? Thus, he ignored all advice and even imprisoned Lu Jing. The army continued to advance, but as soon as they reached Mount Baideng, they were completely surrounded by the Xiongnu. The histories describe the scene of the Xiongnu army. On the western flank were all white horses, to the east blue horses, to the north black horses, and to the front red horses. The formation was awe-inspiring. Only Liu Bang and his troops were trapped in the encirclement, passively enduring blows. The standoff lasted for 7 days and 7 nights. By then, it was the early winter of 200 BC. The soldiers Liu Bang had brought could not adapt to the severe northern cold. Moreover, because of the previous rapid advance, they had not carried enough winter equipment. Many soldiers' fingers froze off when they tried to draw their bows. Non-combat attrition was severe, and morale dropped to its lowest point. Helpless, Liu Bang had to send his strategist Chen Ping to negotiate with the Xiongnu. The core message was simple: "We will give you money if you withdraw your troops." Under the lure of gold, the Xiongnu did indeed lift the siege. This was the first time the Han Dynasty truly realized the power of the Xiongnu. From then on, the Han and the Xiongnu entered into a prolonged tug-of-war lasting several centuries. At this point, let us look at how the Han Dynasty eventually managed to defeat such a vast and fierce enemy. When the Han Dynasty was first established, it had only been about 20 years since the end of the Warring States period. In the northern frontiers, there were still many young men of the Zhou nobility with dreams of restoring their states. This further increased border pressure. For example, inside the siege of Baideng, there was a group of old aristocrats colluding with the Xiongnu, using the descendants of the Zhao royal line to attempt to revive the Zhao state. This was somewhat similar to how, centuries later, Li Shimin allied with the Turks. However, in that later case, Li Shimin succeeded and even counterattacked the Turks. Secondly, although the Han army was not weaker than the Xiongnu in direct battle, the Xiongnu had horses. After raiding, they could quickly retreat, and they always chose weak spots of the Great Wall to plunder the people. Over time, the people were forced to migrate, which in effect ceded the frontier lands to the Xiongnu. To counter this, Emperor Wen of Han adopted the advice of Cao Kuo and implemented 3 frontier governance measures. First was the establishment of Frontier Production and Construction Corps. At that time, soldiers stationed at the border were mostly temporary conscripts who rotated home every 1 or 2 years. They could hardly learn the habits of the Xiongnu. Sending new recruits every year only served to sharpen the Xiongnu's skills. Therefore, Emperor Wen decided to gather permanent frontier populations into defensive fortresses, each with at least 1,000 households. If there were not enough people, convicts would be sent. If convicts were insufficient, mercenaries would be hired. If even that was not enough, high positions and rich rewards were offered to attract volunteers. In short, anyone willing to guard the frontier would be guaranteed lifelong wealth and honor. Moreover, the requirements for military success were not excessively harsh. As long as they could resist Xiongnu invasions, they would be rewarded at half the standard of a victory. It was during this period that Li Guang gradually rose to fame. Second was the large-scale effort to raise horses. Tao Shen had already made it clear to Emperor Wen that Han weaponry was far superior to that of the Xiongnu. While the Xiongnu wore leather armor and carried wooden shields, the Han soldiers wielded iron swords. But the Xiongnu had horses, and the Han severely lacked them, to the point that even the emperor could not muster 4 horses of the same color to pull a carriage. So, Emperor Wen built 36 horse ranches along the frontier. By the height of Emperor Wu's reign, these ranches supplied the court with 360,000 war horses. This was the foundation of Huo Kubing's later victories in his northern campaign. Third was dividing the Xiongnu by absorbing defecting tribes. During the reigns of Emperor Wen and Emperor Jing, many people from the Xiongnu side came to surrender, such as the descendants of Liu Wan who had been wronged, several thousand Xiongnu who defected during Emperor Wen's reign, and 5 Xiongnu tribes that Zhou Yafu once tried to rally. At that time, some advisors suggested that since Han people were unfamiliar with Xiongnu customs and their geographic environment, but there was a group of people whose customs were similar to the Xiongnu. They now came to surrender. If we dressed them in Han army uniforms, gave them Han army weapons, would they not become soldiers who could fight against the Xiongnu? In this way, we could both strengthen the defenses of the Han army and also learn the fighting skills of the Xiongnu. This could be called a perfect plan. This strategy was actually quite brilliant. Later, in the Battle of Mobei, the troops of Huo Kubing included a large number of strong Xiongnu serving as auxiliaries. You have Xiongnu soldiers, I have surrendered Xiongnu people. However, just as there were those who surrendered, there were also those who defected. During the reigns of Emperor Wen and Emperor Jing, the administration already showed many signs of disorder. This caused some border people, unable to endure oppression, to flee to the Xiongnu. Among them, one of the most famous was Zhong Hangyu, called the forefather of traitors. After he fled to the Xiongnu, he revealed the true purpose behind the Han policy of Heqin, causing Han envoys of peace marriages to repeatedly be embarrassed and lose face before the Xiongnu. In short, during the Wen and Jing era, although the Han did not launch large-scale counterattacks against the Xiongnu, many outstanding generals emerged on the frontier, for example, the Li Guang. Especially Li Guang, who until now is still revered as a deity by common people. Why? Because he benefited the people and defended Yanmen Pass. But if only the flying general guarded Longcheng, no Hu horse would dare cross Yinshan. Looking at the map, one can see clearly how important these generals who guarded the borders were to the Han Dynasty. At that time, Yinshan was the southern camp of the Xiongnu. The Xiongnu often came here to hunt and cut timber. South of Yinshan, the most important pass was Yanmen Pass. Here there was no natural barrier to rely on, and it was particularly suitable for cavalry raids to the south. Once Yanmen Pass was broken, the Xiongnu could charge deep into the central plains. The threat was by no means impossible. Unfortunately, the Li Guang who made the Xiongnu tremble with fear died on the frontier because of court infighting. This directly led to the Xiongnu launching large-scale attacks and raids against Yanmen Pass. Indeed, a fortress is often broken from within. However, these policies of breathing with and defending against the Xiongnu lasted until the appearance of one man, who finally drew the matter to a close. Let me first ask a question. Did Emperor Wu attack the Xiongnu 100% just to drive them away? The answer was clearly no. First, it was to resolve internal contradictions. After the rule of Wen and Jing, by the early years of Emperor Wu, the national population had reached the mark of 5,000 million. Yet when Emperor Wu had just ascended the throne, the country was not in a state of abundant harvests, but rather suffered disasters one after another. Earthquakes and famines came continuously. Moreover, after Liu Bang, the Han Gaozu seized the empire. He did not nationalize the land, but distributed it based on military merits. This meant that from the very beginning of the Western Han, the hidden danger of land annexation was already buried. Everyone's starting line was unequal from the outset. To ease domestic class conflicts, the land problem required launching foreign wars in order to shift contradictions outward. In this way, the poor could rely on military merits to gain wealth and glory, while the rich could rely on supporting wars to secure better livelihoods. For everyone, this seemed to be a good thing. Second, it was to consolidate his own power in political struggles. As mentioned earlier, when Emperor Wu had just ascended the throne, power was held by his uncle Tianfen and other relatives of the Empress Dowager. In addition, the domestic princes all coveted the throne. He had to cultivate his own direct forces through foreign wars. Figures such as Wei Qing, Huo Kubing, Li Guang, and Gongsun Hong were essentially all promoted by him personally and became his trusted supporters. Finally, it was to expand the living space of the Han people. Looking at the map, when Emperor Wu first came to power, the territory of the Han Dynasty was not actually very large. With the level of productivity at that time, such a small land area could not possibly feed 5,000 million people. The difficulty was immense. Thus, before the Han stood only two choices. Either internal conflicts would break out into peasant uprisings, or they would expand outward to enlarge their living space. As for the survival of neighboring states, it was not something Emperor Wu had to consider. Therefore, he only had to think about how to expand, not whether to expand. By 133 BC, having basically stabilized domestic governance, Emperor Wu decided to strike the Xiongnu in one move. Thus, he and his ministers devised the plot of Mai. The northern frontier city of Mai was a forward base on the Han Xiongnu front line. The Xiongnu had always wanted to capture it as a base for advance. The Han side recruited a merchant named Ni Yi, who had long been trading on the frontier and was trusted by the Xiongnu. They instructed him to lure the Xiongnu. When Ni Yi met the Chanyu of the Xiongnu, he said, "In my caravan, I have hidden 100 elite soldiers, enough to kill the magistrate of Mai and present the city to the great king." When the Chanyu heard this, he thought Ni Yi was as brave as if a god had been reborn. He immediately dispatched an envoy to follow Ni Yi to Mai and verify the situation. Ni Yi, however, had already prepared in advance. They secretly colluded with the magistrate of Mai County, selecting a prisoner from the jail and making him impersonate the magistrate. Before the eyes of the Xiongnu envoys, they killed him, creating the illusion that Mai was already under control. The Xiongnu envoys believed the ruse and returned to report the situation to the Chanyu. The Chanyu then led 100,000 troops, preparing to enter the city of Mai. But as the army advanced, the Chanyu began to sense something was wrong. Normally, near the steppe and borderlands, there should have been cattle and sheep, as well as commoners grazing. Yet, along the way, there was not a trace of livestock. Alarmed, the Chanyu immediately ordered an attack on a nearby watchtower and captured a Han soldier. He interrogated him, demanding to know what scheme the Han had devised. At first, the captive insisted there was no plot, only that the place was deserted. The Chanyu sneered, "You won't speak? I already know. Surely you are lying in ambush for us." In the end, the soldier confessed that Emperor Wu of Han had hidden 300,000 fully armed soldiers outside Mai, waiting for the Xiongnu. Terrified, the Xiongnu quickly ordered a retreat. By the time the Han forces realized and pursued, the Xiongnu army was already far away. This carefully arranged ambush ended in a humiliating failure for the Han. While the Xiongnu spent the year struggling for survival, a crucial weakness appeared. The steppe was unfortified. According to contemporary estimates, only 1 in 5 Xiongnu could serve as a soldier, at most about 60,000 men. Even if all 60,000 guarded the steppe, scattered across millions of square kilometers of pasture, it was no different from stragglers wandering about. Moreover, during this period, different Xiongnu tribes often fought each other for fertile pastures, which gave the Han an excellent opportunity to launch surprise attacks. Thus, the decisive Han victories against the Xiongnu, such as the Battle of Gaokui, the Battle of Yinshan, and the Battle of Mobei, were all launched in spring. Why? Because in spring, the Xiongnu were completely undefended. As the saying goes, "If you take away my Chilean mountains, my livestock will not thrive." The Han always struck in spring, when the Xiongnu were engaged in calving and lambing, preventing their herds from reproducing normally. Furthermore, economic foundations determine political structures. The Xiongnu way of production and life made their political system very different from that of the Han. The Chanyu's royal court, or the sacred site of Langjuksu Mountain, was near Lake Baikal. The farther north one went, the closer to the Xiongnu's base, and the denser their elite warriors became. On one hand, the harsh northern environment was the cradle of fierce Xiongnu fighters, far superior to the Xiongnu of Yinshan in the south, who only knew how to chop wood. On the other hand, power came from the saddle. To maintain his loose tribal confederation, the great Chanyu had to keep his most elite cavalry by his side, concentrated in the northern steppe. This meant the Xiongnu's military deployment, like that of the Song dynasty centuries later, focused only on strengthening central forces while neglecting border defense. Thus, the Shiji clearly recorded that when Li Guangli campaigned north to Mobei, all he encountered were the Chanyu's elite golden-armored troops. Emperor Wu of Han also realized in Chang'an that the Han must take the initiative, striking at the Xiongnu's weakest moments. In the 5th year of Yuanguang, he dispatched 4 armies against the Xiongnu. Gongsun. He returned with no success. Gongsun lost 7,000 soldiers, and Li Guang nearly lost his entire army and was captured by the Xiongnu, barely escaping alive. Only Wei Qing led his forces to victory at the Longcheng of the Xiongnu. 2 years later, the Xiongnu changed their strategy, attacking from the northeast into Liaoxi. Emperor Wu immediately adopted a counter-strategy: you fight your battle, I fight mine. He first pinned down the Xiongnu main force in the northeast, then ordered Wei Qing to lead elite troops from Yunzhong, marching west and striking as far as Gaokui, then attacking the Xiongnu in the Hetao region. Why fight this way? The answer is simple: city walls are never built to defend against one's own people. When Qin Shi Huang sent Meng Tian to recover Hetao, he had built a great wall there. But as time passed, this strategic land was once again occupied by the Xiongnu, who had no intention of repairing it. Why would they build it? They had no need. Yet this weakness was quickly exploited by the Han. Using the Xiongnu's own raiding tactics, they retook the occupied Hetao wetlands. At that time, the Xiongnu still wore leather armor and carried primitive arrows. They often needed to gather at least 5 times the Han's numbers and wait until the Han had exhausted their arrows before daring to charge. Strategically, these 2 wars were immensely significant. After retaking Hetao, the Han established Jiuyuan Commandery and Shuofan Commandery, providing stable forward bases and natural pastures. More crucially, the loss of Hetao meant the Xiongnu forfeited their only arable land. From then on, they shifted from a semi-nomadic polity to a purely nomadic regime, the Xiongnu royal court. They could only crowd into those places rich in water and grass. Keep in mind that later, peoples like the Tujue were not purely nomadic regimes, but semi-nomadic, semi-sedentary. This means the core pastoral zones lacking full nomadism had to stabilize toward the south. Just as when the Tang destroyed the Tujue, they only secured Dingxiang city. Moreover, when Wei Qing struck at the Xiongnu's Longcheng, the point was not merely to devastate an enemy homeland, but to learn exactly where the Xiongnu's home was and to memorize the mountains and rivers along the route. Those were the places where the Xiongnu would pasture their herds in later years. From then on, whenever Han forces wanted to find the Xiongnu, they only had to check those water-rich spots and they would be sure to encounter them. As Han bases kept pushing north, the water sources the Xiongnu could control grew fewer. The fewer the water sources, the easier it was for Han troops to locate them. By 19 BC, Emperor Wu had already gained multiple experiences of campaigning beyond the frontier and had cultivated rising star generals like Huo Kubing. He was determined to eliminate the northern threat once and for all. For this decisive battle, the Han prepared 140,000 warhorses and also dispatched over 100,000 infantry and civilian laborers organized into support units to fully back the northern expedition. Such a massive concentration of forces naturally attracted the attention of Xiongnu spies. Previously, Zhao Xin, who had surrendered to the Xiongnu, advised the Chanyu that because Han troops would come from afar and must cross the desert to reach Mobe, they would be exhausted and easy to lose their way. He suggested concentrating the best forces and letting them tire themselves out while the Xiongnu held position to wait for them. Generals listening to Zhao Xin's counsel found nothing wrong with it. Centuries later, the Tang general Shui Rengui once got lost on his triumphant return, so the point seemed plausible. The problem was that Zhao Xin's suggestion reached the ears of Emperor Wu. In other words, the Xiongnu's military council had a Han spy among them, indeed. Who in the world did not have someone who knew Han affairs? Once the Han learned of the Xiongnu's battle plan, they immediately adjusted their deployments, entrusting all the elite troops to the young Huo Kubing, with orders aimed directly at the Chanyu. The remaining forces were placed under the Grand General Wei Qing, tasked against the Xiongnu left-worthy prince. But later, from a Xiongnu captive, the Han discovered they had misjudged the main location of the Xiongnu forces, and hurriedly swapped the frontier positions of Wei Qing and Huo Kubing. After crossing the frontier, it turned out the swap had not taken place in time. Wei Qing ran into the Great Chanyu's main force. Moreover, because of a prior personal dispute with Li Guang, after their forces split, Wei Qing led fewer than 30,000 Han troops to stand and fight the Xiongnu main body. Fortunately, luck favored them. After a bloody battle, the Xiongnu still fled. On the other side, Huo Kubing, with many surrendered Xiongnu serving as his auxiliaries and holding all the elite units in his right hand, plus the experience gained from multiple earlier expeditions, led his troops across the desert, first capturing alive the Xiongnu minister Jie Ku and executing the northern Tuqi king. He then turned to attack the left Grand General, seizing enemy banners and war drums. After crossing the Yanji Mountains and crossing the Juyan waters, he captured Xiutu King, the Hunye King and 3 others, along with 83 officers including generals, prime ministers, household commanders, and dukes. In total, Huo Kubing captured 70,000 Xiongnu, while suffering only 10,000 casualties himself. At the end, Huo Kubing did not even know where he had arrived. From Xiongnu captives, he learned the place was Languksu Mountain, where the Xiongnu performed their sky worship. Huo Kubing was instantly fired up. I, Huo Kubing, will worship our Han gods at the place where you perform your sky rites. From then on, being enchefed with Langzhushu became the highest honor for generals through the ages. Langzhushu Mountain a must-visit site for famous commanders, and the name Han became the permanent name of a great people.